When many gamers think of MechWarrior, they think of slow motion. But at the best of times, MechWarrior is running around inciting violence like your gun's a stylus and you paint the world in the primary crayon colors with RGB standing for righteous gun battles. It's separating enemies from their parts, using your own smarts to decide between head and limb shots, leaving two categories, the have and the have-nots. It's thunderfooting into enemy lands made of whatever I choose or whatever enemies lose that I pick up and connect with bolts and polymer glues. And at its worst, it's meh. Which one of these is MechWarrior 5 Clans? A standalone title from the original MechWarrior 5 Mercenaries game, replacing the procedural with a narrative-driven, the open-ended mercenary company's gameplay with a single story of Clan Smoke Jaguar. Giant mechs? Check. Alpha strikes and Dune-like politics? Check. All that and more can be had for the free price of watching this video and seeing if you like what's coming your way. I don't know, subscribe or something. Let's begin. Speaking about performance first, Clans has a different look than Mercenaries, which makes sense. In some ways, it's a good deal cleaner, especially notable in larger areas. But it's hard not to notice the game's leanness in the environments as well, even in the later locations. Yes, it is filled with destructible parts, buildings, trees, construction machinery, and more. While environmentally it looks fine, it doesn't do a great deal to differentiate itself, especially as the better locations are only shown a couple hours in, and doing a large number of missions in the same drawn-out canyons and dunes doesn't necessarily help this game hit the ground running. I've always loved the look of big mech games, with MechWarrior being one of my favorites. Heavier mechs, not always done to look cool alone, but having that menacing utilitarian style to them. The things are placed here or there for a reason, but it also just happens to look pretty damn cool. It's also helped by total destruction mechanics. Taking out arms pays off because the sound of a huge heavy battle mech rearing down on you sounds a lot less intimidating when he looks like the world's worst built watchtower with a useless SOB inside trying to figure out how to hurt you because you blew his arms off 20 seconds prior. That being said, the level of detail in the destruction isn't always the best when it comes to on the actual mechs. Layering textures that look like black marks or smoke across the front of a mech to indicate some kind of secondary damage doesn't really hit well. Nor do a lot of the explosions, which looks like a cigar club and everybody just breathing out at the same time. When mechs get killed, some bob into the air momentarily as well, popping up, an issue that MechWarrior Mercenaries also had. Or firing a huge load of missiles, and then they hit the ground and their target's explosions are decidedly last generation, and the decals as well, just leaving little pockmark holes in the ground. That doesn't mean it's all bad. In the busiest of times, with enemies jump jetting around you, you jump into the air, twisting and blasting another guy in the back with a full hit, and watching parts come off as they crumble, then fall to the earth, does feel good, and does actually replicate well what MechWarrior's trying to get across. Texture-wise, not as much as got across. It's not terrible, but there are a number of issues with textures not loading in fast enough, and this is even on the patch that's right prior to release. Weirdly, for a game with handmade placements and a good deal of showcasing of narrative-driven locations, they still oddly look procedural, with spots of machinery just planted here or there. It can look patchwork as hell. Now, performance is acceptable with all settings on the highest on a 4090 at 4K. It gets well over 60, which you would expect, but it also has DLSS and frame gen, which helps immensely in huge battles with weaker hardware. The curve down through cards to the 2080 shows a relative path of performance you should expect. While it doesn't particularly impress, it's still a good deal better than many games we get these days, with issues even hitting 60 4K max on highest settings on super powerful cards. It also has settings for view distance, effects, shadows, texture, foliage, post-processing, anti-aliasing, and filtering. I didn't get to check this one on the Steam Deck, but I would suggest if you do, it's probably going to have to be turned down quite a bit. Speaking of turning it down, let's talk about the audio. Yeah, okay. First, Clan Jaguar always sounds like they sleep on beds of friggin' Oxford dictionaries, not in their word use or terminology, but in their sentence structure with a lack of contraction so profound that when someone says can't, they almost schedule a military tribunal to decide if they should die by firing squad, where everyone shoots them with all the missing fucking apostrophes. And there isn't anything wrong with that. There isn't anything wrong with can not, do not, and will not. It's all lore appropriate, no matter how clumsy it can feel. You just got to be prepared for that, and I was fine. But there are some other sound issues. One of the characters in particular in your group has all sorts of odd warbles and sound issues with her voice that makes it sound like she recorded it at home in a bathoscope in her backyard swimming pool. Lastly, characters you meet in the story actually start to sound better as the story continues on and you get accustomed to it. But this isn't something that you can say, hey, 6 hours later I got accustomed to it. Instead, it's 7 hours later. It still doesn't sound particularly great. And that's because most of voice is based on the writing, which I'm going to talk about the story in a bit. Now, I give them props for nailing a lot of the lore, but the writing just doesn't keep up with it. When it comes to writing music is difficult, and I was wondering where this was going to be. This has some sweet-ass, almost throat-singing music that sounds like something out of the Dune movies, the newer ones, and then leaps to this thumping electronic beat as you yeet across a mountainside, and then blow the legs off some drummer who's trying to claw his way up to success by firing into the cannon walls, thinking he's playing Red Faction Remastered and he's going to dig to you. I enjoyed a lot of the music, most of it fits the moments, and it gets the blood pumping a bit. When it comes to the sound, I mentioned there were also some sound issues with some of the voice files. There's a couple here in the game too. Luckily, a lot of patches have come late in the day on this one, and it's fixed most of the audio issues I had, especially cutting out audio during the cutscenes. It can't be stressed enough that a game based on the story as big as MechWarrior and focused on the narrative would benefit from actually hearing the, audio. The mixing itself is still a little hit and miss. I suggest you go in and adjust the audio settings after the first mission, the center in particular if you have that option on your own system. And footsteps are a bit muted as well. It's nice hearing your rockets jet away or the blast of your lasers, and also the heaviest blast slam into your mech with a nice heavy metal banging sound, but it never really felt exactly tuned in when it came to the sound. Your mileage is going to vary here. We all have different audio systems. I checked this on a home stereo system, headphones, as well as a PC. In MechWarrior 5 Clans, you play as new recruits in Smoke Jaguar's cadet program, thrown into the thick of the clan invasion of the Inner Sphere during Operation Revival, and you're in command of a 5-man star squad during the invasion back into that core. Clans is basically the first clan-focused MechWarrior game in nearly 30 years, as I said during the preview, and that means that every mission, every location is put down piece by piece by the developers. Nothing procedural, spot to spot, mission to mission, with only tangential side trips to take out tanks or other tertiary enemies. As I said in the preview, it is a closer feel to the way Gears 1 played out versus the more open-ended Gears 5. Now, you take your star, which is the name of the 5-man team, and you drop onto planets, and it has you taking on different missions. You go out, you defend some forces, you do some lightning strikes and raids, do a couple stealth missions, and a lot of times just cause general chaos. It's all about getting in and laying waste to as many enemies as you can. The missions start out on one planet, slowly unfolding the story, then breaks into a couple missions you can take in different order, with a display of what kind of mission that you'll be doing, loosely translated to patrol, assault, and assault patrol, or kill everything, kill it faster, or hide for a bit, then kill it. And to that, MechWarrior games have always been about pimping your ride, which means 30-ton light mechs to 80-ton heavies, ponderously moving around the landscape, hoping some daft enemy lurches into their laser sights so they can effectively test how many holes a bipedal sail can take before it just stops working. Here, mechs are separated by total tonnage, and that's how much weight you can throw on these clumsy fatties before they succumb to your digital fast food order, and you can't pack on any more pounds. Then you make sure that the choices you made fit under the tonnage limit of the missions themselves, and you drop onto the planet. And then it's combat time. Dropping onto planets after the initial mission briefing sees you moving across the planet through pre-planned areas, taking on smaller side opportunities like scanning items or splitting off, and sometimes getting into engagements you didn't plan. But for almost all of the game, it's mission briefing, drop, mission, step, then final confrontation. Sometimes enemies are dropped from drop ships, other times they're holed up in bases, and other times they're on patrols that you sometimes have to skirt past or suffer insanely hard fights to get through that risk calling in more. Whether you fight in first or third person, the combat is a balance between damage, heat buildup, and the inevitable death spiral of mech shutdown, as well as jump jetting in at just the right time to take on an enemy. While first person is my favorite view for viewpoint, third person here can help immensely when in elevated positions, as mech's weapons can hit the ridge in front of you if you aren't careful, and third person gives you a bit more viewable angle to prepare, especially because some of these weapons have particularly low mount points. Heaviness wise, it does feel pretty good depending on the settings, but up until your middle level and higher mechs, MechWarrior clans can feel a bit more speedy than I think many gamers are going to be expecting. To somebody who's never jumped in here, expect it to be a little faster than maybe the mechs look when you initially see them. The HUD has all the information that you're going to need, and some you may not want, with lists of your star to your lower left and the remaining hit points. You also have your armor and damage for your mech, as well as radar in the bottom middle, and you have your reticle and heat levels, as well as distances. And in the lower right, you have a readout of every weapon, their reload status, as well as damage statuses and ammo. And you're going to need to keep an eye on this because while you always start with a 5-man star, a team of mechs that you put together, hopefully with some forethought, if you don't handle heat right or just get unlucky and someone gets destroyed, you may end up having to leap into the other mechs to take manual control or direct them easily enough around in a lineup to attack your target via a battle map I'll talk about in a second. It's easy to leap into the seat of pretty much any mech in the group with a double button press or with a radio menu. That's a workable solution for a situation that may need to be done in the thick of battle, and you should probably become accustomed to it before it gets to that point. Something you can do pretty much at any time at the start of any mission. And this helps because even on hard, the AI isn't great with keeping itself out of your way. I get that they're courageous, but these dudes consistently swipe past you when you're firing. They have absolutely no idea what they are doing or any idea that you are all inside mechs with broadside level weaponry. And when you're laying down withering fire on a dropship system to keep it from taking off, that giant laser beam beside them isn't some cute flashlight at a rave. And they'll strafe right past you like a goddamned idiot. If you're in your mech, that can happen before you actually realize it too, because your left weapon may be out far enough that they can get hit just as you're seeing them enter the picture. The enemy AI has a tendency to do the same, but as you can guess, that doesn't bother me near as much. Luckily, the game does have an excellent, if somewhat small, battle control system where you can control them via that radio system I said before, or leap into an overhead map and send them around the field, which means you can actually send them to the other side of the skirmish if they're just getting in your way. When sending them around, they handle themselves well enough, though, they don't always seem to actually use the right weapons for particular engagements, so be aware of that. Yeah, basically bots alleviated by, of course, inviting some of your friends to play, unless they're like my friends who would make the AI in the game look like a futuristic quantum computer ushering in mankind's elevation up the Kardashev scale in comparison. Your mileage is going to vary depending on AI or people, or the mix of both. Now, when you complete the missions, you assign techs to clean up the battlefield. These guys take items, systems, and mech parts from the destroyed enemies you faced or items you scanned so that they can fuel research systems. But pretty much for any of that, you're always going to need money, and in this game, that's basically honor, something you also get whenever you complete a mission. And between missions, you're always going to find yourself at Mission Central. This is where you choose your missions. You can also go to social areas, archives, barracks, and the different storefronts. The facilities themselves offer more than just a place to check out the mechs. For example, you'll quickly see the importance of your technicians themselves. These guys are vital to keeping your mech in working order. If your mech comes back damaged, assigning technicians to repair it is pretty crucial. The less technicians you give it to get it back to 100%, the more damage it'll have when you go back to field it. The speed of the repair depends on how many technicians you allot, and sometimes you need to swap out mechs or wait while repairs are underway because it's just too dangerous to bring one out with you. And because downtime and just time itself is the cost here, having a couple additional mechs sitting around is helpful for those times when you go back to base and realize you don't have enough resources when it comes to spending and repairing it, or enough technicians. In addition to those repairs, you're going to find areas dedicated to research and upgrades. Here you can unlock and enhance your mech's weapons, equipment, and chassis. As you progress with certain mechs, you're going to unlock these chassis milestones, which grant additional rewards and bonuses each time you end up checking them off. This is a cool inner game achievement that reflects pilot skill with the mech and rewards you in pretty good chunks. While research and development allows you to experiment with different paths for improving your mech and ensures that you're always evolving your strategy and increasing your effectiveness, you spin the salvage I talked about before in this section as well, with research scientists basically taking apart that salvage you brought back to help you improve. Basically backtesting technologies. Once you've checked what ones you want to build, like active probes, armor damage reduction, more damage, extended range for laser weapons, or what have you, they go to work. And this can take a couple different turns to build up. And it can certainly be pushed past a mission that you have coming up. Even at the start, there are over 60 research options available, giving you plenty of ways to customize, improve your arsenal, check out the different ways in which all of the mechs fight. It is good to plan a little bit here, but it isn't a game that really restricts you or makes things so penalizing that you can't change a plan halfway through. You can also invest points in upgrading the space lab itself and enhancing salvage operations. It just makes them more efficient. And once you get done with that, you can go to the marketplace. This is where you're going to buy all of the weapons and equipment and the mechs. Items like heat sinks, advanced gear, they can all extend your combat endurance, though most of the times it's always a trade-off in size and fit. Balancing your resources between repairing mechs, researching upgrades, and purchasing new items is always going to be the key to getting through the next mission. And really, when it comes to buying, there's some issues I'll talk about in a second, but it's one of the more important places in the game. And it certainly does, in many ways, reflect the opposite sides of MechWarrior clans. One side being the combat, and the entire other side being all this resource management. Remember, as I said, dropships have tonnage limits, so you can't just throat goat like 5 heavy mechs into a dropship and expect it to work. Having a nice selection is important. But there's one problematic ass area for this game. There isn't a quick way to compare to current mechs or weapons. In fact, there's a lot of missing data here, which would help even if you aren't looking to instantly outfit something. That's like going in to buy a second pair of shoes at a sweet shoe store and suddenly you're fucking barefoot. Also, because as mech pilots, we love our favorite mechs. Many times traditions are going to take over for tried and true statistics because we just like them to look cool. We trot them out into battle, craven designed machines or monstrous puzzle wartime pieces that seem to have the complexity of a Mandelbrot set. It would absolutely behoove the game to have more comparisons here. The game's arbitrary difficulty to find data has you bouncing between a ton of screens to find information that, for many players, is going to be directly related to an expensive ass purchase in the first place. This problem continues even in the mech bay when putting new items down on the different mechs. The game's menus just get in the way all the time. And you realize that trying to individualize mechs is hilariously harder than it should be. For example, each mech has a specific armor for each location, as well as a number of spots already utilized for mechanisms like servos and such, and all of those locations are big enough that you usually can slot in some items. For smaller sections, you've got your SRMs. For large ones, particle cannons and LRMs, each with their own later somewhat individualized and specialized versions, as well as improvements your research adds to them. But be warned, many of them are cosmetic, and they're a bit more form over function, with only small changes. Not all of them are like that, but I found it disappointing as the upgrade path. Lastly, you're going to want to make sure you have the right people for the right job, and you have your characters in the barracks, where Jaden and his team can be leveled up. They have skills ranging from missiles, better ranged fire, mobility, and so on, including the ability to just evade more incoming attacks, which is great. It's important to keep a close eye on them, as switching out a mech may have those pilot skills be relatively useless until you outfit the mech with weapons or systems that more accurately work in synergy with that character's skills, which means, other than some icons here or there, you're going to be diving back into the menus to realize what that mech actually has, what kind of items it has, what kind of skills your character has, then try to go in and buy some items or take some out of your inventory and figure out how to put it all together. Just cumbersome. When it comes to actually switching out your controls, that's not so much. For example, the gamepad, while you can't remap everything on it, I found a usable scheme. And with mouse and keyboard, you can pretty much remap everything. And there's also still the game option to control like a turret, a giant multi-barreled bristling armored porcupine with a fuck the world attitude that fires middle fingers in the form of 40-pound missiles at every enemy. Or you can have a bit more finesse and control the torso and the weapon separately. It's up to you. That worked quite well. You also have joystick. I haven't seen a list of compatible joysticks yet, and my older one didn't get recognized, but I actually almost assuredly believe that's the age of this particular joystick I was attempting to use. And luckily, because of the way the game starts out, you do start out outfitted with light mechs, which makes sense as you're scouting, really, versus diving into full-blown assaults. They don't feel like mechs at the first part. They feel a little quick, but that actually works out, especially as you're coming to grips with the controls. It's not an excuse. I'm just trying to explain what it feels like when you're actually experiencing it. Now, when I talked about the multiplayer, this does have full support for 5-player cross-play co-op on PlayStation 5, Xbox, and PC. On the PC, I had one full crash to desktop and one mission where the enemies just literally stopped attacking. It was a very early mission and everybody just stopped firing it at everybody else. And I thought it was awesome, but they also stopped taking damage, two things that are sort of required to complete a level. The game doesn't save so much, so I did have to restart. Be aware that you're not doing a lot of saving in the actual missions themselves. For the most part, you start, you do the mission, or you die, and you restart. So if you have a crash, that's going to pop up. When it comes to all this, though, did it impact the fun? Did it impact all the enjoyment? Yeah. For example, if comparison's the thief of joy, then competition is the mugger of expectations. First, the good, though. When the gameplay is rocking, just hitting an enemy and you know you're going to pop a mech's arm off, watch it explode, or leap behind another mech and death blossom their backsides by planting 6 bullet seeds into the back and then trying to speed grow it with 3 laser cannons up close, that feels great. Firing off your last shots as heat shuts down your systems and you realize you miscalculated and the enemy mech isn't dead, he's just mostly dead or somewhat alive and full pissed, and he turns to fire at you and you find yourself doing kung fu angle geometry problems in your head to figure out if they can turn in time before your heat systems hotboxes its way into uselessness, or if it turns back on and you can take a shot, or at the very least run away. That is when the game hit the best. MechWarrior Clans has the chops to do something really engaging, especially with its narrative mixed with that. And for those without any of the extra knowledge, it'll probably feel decidedly poor. The game tries to make you care about this or that group, and an aged wrong come back like a weaponized acid reflux to gag the offender responsible never really feels like it gets going. The story is one that's contained in a much larger narrative, which I don't actually mind, but it doesn't engage you in the smaller group matters. It's a personalized story, but one that, for better or worse, has chosen to actually have impersonal groups on the surface to deliver it, not helped by the faction-speaking patterns or odd ideas about honor and warrior code that goes with it. This means the game's one big strength just becomes a thing you tangentially interact with. This is compounded by the many issues with the ideas of outfit and weaponizing your mechs being closed off by so many caveats, from the tonnage to the clan weapon types to the poor comparison choices, as well as locked-in mech platforms that keep you all restricted, some of those making sense perfectly within the narrative, and others just not being the clearest game design. The game's narrative slant leaves only the simulated battles as anything to do outside of the major story as well, which also means that the flexibility or the feeling of a somewhat reactive universe is gone. That fits with the narrative, but it doesn't necessarily pay off to the gamer who maybe just wants to train or do something and not repeat the most repetitive missions ever. Even with co-op, the end result is a game that feels at distinct odds with itself. Even new additions like that battle map and sending your star out to take out enemies seems halfway utilized. It works well enough with a couple button presses to send everyone to any target and watching them tear off. That's great. But its window is a view window that's arbitrarily small to the location around you, something I did point out in the preview, and sadly doesn't extend back as far as you came. Most of the time I found that the window I could move the other mechs through worked well enough, but there were many times where I bumped up against the edge and was like, man, I wish this just stretched out a little farther. Something I wish that was used a little farther too were systems like stealth and scanning. Like, for instance, perhaps finding an enemy at longer distances. And for the hacking, it feels like an interplay of nothing, a single button pressed while holding another, like a hacking minigame where the minigame is a fucking button that says done. And this is why previews versus reviews are always so interesting. Let me just pontificate for a moment. With a preview, it's usually a small amount of time with a restricted number of missions and settings, and it's rarely gonna let you see the game flow long enough to get an idea of the wide split between happy to see something and overstaying your damned welcome. I rate games on a buy, wait for a sale, deep sale, or never touch kind of rating system. This game also got recently announced for Game Pass. When it comes to overstaying its welcome or just being happy to see me, I would say this one is definitely a wait for a sale or checking it out on Game Pass. It's not a deep sale. There's some stuff here to like, but it definitely doesn't hit as strong as it should. For me, this is a title that for the first couple hours are fun and may extend for you. There's various systems for outfitting mechs and leveling up that's enjoyable as well, but it's all a bit too shallow. And people are going to be arguing about the fiction and how it's presented in games forever. If you put a MechWarrior nerd and Warhammer 40k nerd in a room, they'd create a perpetual energy machine made of ass, sweat, and arguments over non-fictional genetics. That mystery will be forever, like realizing crop circles are alien emojis, and they apparently all are fans of Goatsy. I don't really care about the fiction and how it's going to be presented. If they change it, it's just like a book changing it for a movie. But they have to end up speaking to the strengths, and a game's strength and its form in a game that says, hey, we're going to try to hit a narrative here, didn't hit it. The actual game's mechanics also have enough issues. Yeah, wait for a sale. That's it for me. Give it a thumbs up if you liked it. Give it a thumbs up if you disliked it. Give it a thumbs up if you're here. Leave a comment. Always enjoy those. And you'll see us on the podcast on Friday. More games, including a top list for what's coming in November. I'm starting to really dig doing those videos. They're actually more enjoyable than I ever thought they would be, unless the next month's videos suck, and then it's just like having a video version of a really bad memory that keeps coming back to haunt you for years down the road. Peace out.
Smoke them out.
New target.
This is a glorified training exercise. They were fighting a losing battle.
Target destroyed. New target. New hostile detected. Panther.
We have a target down.
Scanner engaged. New hostile detected. Fire starter. Scan mode disengaged.
Hostile terminated. Outpost Bravo is clear of defenders.
Proceed forward, Star Commander. Hopefully the elemental...
To me, you five are the excrement of a failed, semi-aborted batch from my bloodhouse. Far from the pinnacle of humanity demanded by the clan's geneticists that spawned you!